Welcome to the Science of Hockey, the podcast where we break down the science behind ice hockey. I'm the analyst, your host, and every week we explore the data, research, and evidence that shape how we play, train, and understand the game of hockey. From biomechanics to performance psychology, we take you beyond the rink and into the research lab, giving you insights that go beyond hearsay and into what really makes the difference on the ice. Whether you're a player, a coach, a parent, or just someone passionate about the sport, we're here to bring you scientifically backed information in a language that's friendly and easy to understand. So grab your skates and let's dive into the science of hockey. Welcome to the Science of Hockey, where research powers the rink. I'm your host, the analyst. Today, we explore how young hockey players fuel their performance. From carbs and protein to hydration and vitamin D. Find out what keeps these athletes energized and growing during a demanding training camp.
All right, welcome back everybody for another deep dive. Today we're lacing up our skates and hitting the ice for a deep dive into the nutrition of young hockey players. We're talking about elite-level boys, 10 to 13 years old, who spent a week at a pretty intense summer hockey camp. Like, these kids were basically living and breathing hockey.
Yeah, and to fuel that level of dedication, they needed a seriously dialed-in diet, right? What's really fascinating is that researchers were actually able to track exactly what these young athletes were consuming during this week-long camp, thanks to a 2022 study published in the journal Nutrients.
That's right, and get this. These kids were eating way more than your average Canadian kid. We're talking like 48% more calories for the 10 and 11-year-olds and 23% more for the 12 and 13-year-old group.
Oh, but before you picture them like downing mountains of pizza and candy, it's important to understand this isn't about overeating. It's about fueling those, grueling practices and making sure that their bodies have what they need to recover and grow.
Okay, so let's break down what they were actually eating. First up, carbs. I know carbohydrates are like super crucial for athletes, but how much were these kids actually consuming?
Hold on to your hats because we're talking 8.9 to 11.2 grams of carbs per kilogram of body mass per day. That's almost double the recommended amount for kids their age.
Wow, that's a lot of carbs, but I imagine with all that skating and checking, they're burning through energy pretty quickly.
Exactly. We're talking high-intensity bursts of energy, and carbs are the primary fuel source for that kind of effort. Think of it this way. Carbs are what allow a player to explode off the face-off or maintain speed during a long shift. Plus, they're crucial for replenishing those depleted glycogen stores in their muscles.
So all those carbs are going towards powering those quick bursts on the ice. What about building and repairing muscle after a tough practice?
That's where protein comes in, and these young athletes weren't skimping on that either. The younger group, the 10 and 11-year-olds, were actually consuming a whopping 3.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body mass each day.
Hold on, 3.2 grams? Isn't that way more than the average kid needs?
You're right. It is significantly higher than the standard recommendations. But remember, we're talking about athletes who are pushing their bodies to the limit. That extra protein helps repair the microtears in muscles caused by explosive skating and body checks, allowing them to recover faster and build strength. It's like giving their muscles the building blocks they need to come back stronger after each practice.
That makes sense, especially considering they're still, growing and developing, so their protein needs are naturally higher. But I'm curious about something else. We've talked about carbs and protein, but what about those all-important vitamins and minerals?
Well, for the most part, these young athletes were getting enough of most essential vitamins and minerals, which makes sense considering their high energy intake. However, there's one surprising finding that really jumped out at me.
Ooh, a plot twist. What was it?
Both groups were significantly lacking in vitamin D. In fact, they were consuming less than half the recommended daily amount.
Now, that's concerning, especially since vitamin D plays such a crucial role in bone health, which is obviously critical for young developing athletes.
Exactly. And this finding really highlights how even a highly tuned diet might not be enough to meet all their needs. We'll dive deeper into this vitamin D dilemma and what it means for these young players later in the episode.
Sounds like we're just getting started, but before we move on, I have to ask, what about sodium? I imagine these kids were sweating buckets on the ice. Did the researchers track that?
They did, and prepare to be surprised. Because these young athletes had a sodium intake way above the recommended limit.
Wait, seriously? That much sodium sounds a little alarming? Are we sure these kids aren't putting themselves at risk?
Now, before you envision them chugging pickle juice by the gallon, it's crucial to understand the context. Remember, these hockey players are losing significant amounts of sodium through sweat during those intense practices. Replenishing those electrolytes is vital for maintaining hydration and preventing muscle cramps, which can really hamper their performance.
So in this case, the high sodium intake is more about offsetting those heavy losses.
Precisely. It's all about finding the right balance for their specific needs.
This is fascinating. It seems like every aspect of their diet is carefully calibrated to support their training and development. I'm wondering what stands out to you about the dietary habits of these young hockey players. What surprised you the most? Take a moment to think about it, because we'll be right back with even more insights from the research in just a moment. And we're back. I hope you had a chance to consider, what stood out to you so far? We've already uncovered some pretty surprising facts about these young hockey players and what it takes to fuel their intense training.
It really is remarkable, isn't it? And as we kind of dig deeper into this research, we find even more fascinating details. For instance, remember how we mentioned that the older kids, the 10 and 11-year-olds, were consuming more calories overall? Well, it turns out they were also taking in more energy per kilogram of body mass compared to the 12 and 13-year-old group.
Interesting. So even though they're smaller in size, they're actually consuming more fuel relative to their weight.
Exactly. And this difference highlights a crucial point about growth and development in young athletes. The 10 and 11-year-olds are still in a period of rapid growth, so their bodies demand more energy per unit of body weight compared to the slightly older group. It's like their bodies are working overtime to build muscle, bone, and all those other essential components.
That makes perfect sense. It's not just about their total size. It's about fueling those growing bodies. But I'm curious, how does all this compare to the official recommendations for young athletes? Did the researchers address that?
They did, and it's interesting to see how the actual intake of these hockey players stacks up against those guidelines. They compared the players' diets to the recommendations set by Health Canada in their 2010 Dietary Reference Intakes report. And as we've already touched upon, these young athletes were exceeding the recommended intakes for several key nutrients.
Okay, let's break that down a bit further. We know they were consuming a lot of carbs and protein. Were they hitting the specific targets?
They weren't just hitting the targets, they were blowing past them. Remember, the recommended daily carbohydrate intake for this age group is around 3.6 to 4.5 grams per kilogram of body mass. These players were consuming almost double that, with the older children having the highest intake.
Whoa, that's a significant difference.
Yeah.
But you explained earlier how those carbs are crucial for powering those explosive movements on the ice and replenishing their glycogen stores. What about protein? Did they meet those recommendations as well?
Again, they went above and beyond. The recommended daily protein intake for this age group is between 0.95 and 1.2 grams per kilogram of body mass. These young hockey players were consuming more than double that, with the younger group reaching an impressive 3.2 grams per kilogram.
It's incredible to see how their bodies are using all that extra protein to recover and build muscle. It really underscores how different their nutritional needs are compared to the average kid.
You're absolutely right. And it's important to remember that these recommendations are specifically tailored for athletes who are engaged in rigorous training. They wouldn't necessarily apply to kids who aren't pushing their bodies to the same extent.
That's a crucial point. But I want to circle back to the vitamin D deficiency we discussed earlier. Do we have any insights into why these young athletes weren't getting enough of this essential nutrient?
Unfortunately, the study didn't pinpoint specific reasons for the vitamin D deficiency. However, it's worth noting that many Canadians, even those who are active, struggle to get enough vitamin D through diet alone. Factors like limited sun exposure, especially during the winter months, can contribute to this deficiency.
That makes sense, especially considering these hockey players likely spend a lot of time training indoors.
Exactly. And this finding underscores the importance of considering factors beyond just diet when it comes to vitamin D levels in young athletes. Things like sun exposure and potentially even supplementation might need to be part of the conversation.
You've raised some excellent points, but there's one more thing I'd like to explore further. The surprisingly high sodium intake we touched on earlier. I know you explained why it's not necessarily a cause for alarm in this context, but I'm still curious to delve a little deeper.
And of course, it's understandable to be concerned about excessive sodium, especially in young people. But as we discussed, these hockey players are losing substantial amounts of sodium through sweat during their intense training sessions.
Right. It's all about replacing those electrolytes lost through sweat.
Precisely. Replenishing those electrolytes is crucial for maintaining proper hydration and preventing those debilitating muscle cramps that can sideline an athlete. The study found that their sodium intake, while high, was likely compensating for those losses.
So it's a delicate balance between their sodium intake, their activity levels, and those sweat losses.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of individualizing dietary recommendations based on an athlete's specific needs and circumstances. A one-size-fits-all approach simply wouldn't work in this case. But this deep dive has really showcased the complex interplay between diet and performance in young athletes. There's so much more to it than just telling them to eat their vegetables.
You're telling me, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. But before we move on to our final segment, I want to pause for a moment and pose a question to you, our listener. We've explored the intricate link between diet and athletic performance in these young hockey players. Now, think about your own life, your own experiences. What other factors besides nutrition do you think play a role in shaping an athlete's success, particularly at such a young age? What comes to mind?
That's an excellent question, and one that deserves careful consideration. We'll be back in a moment to wrap up our deep dive into the world of young hockey players and their dietary needs. Until then, keep those thoughts brewing.
And we're back. I bet you've come up with some pretty awesome insights about what factors besides nutrition contribute to an athlete's success at a young age.
Yeah, it's a multifaceted question for sure. It speaks to the fact that athletic development isn't just about physical prowess.
Right. It's about the whole package. And while this research article focuses on diet, it actually hints at some of those other key factors. Remember how the study took place at like a week-long hockey camp? Well, that kind of structured environment with dedicated coaching and a focus on, skill development probably played a big role in these players' progress.
For sure. Think about it. The quality of coaching, the training regimen, access to proper equipment and facilities, these all had a huge impact on an athlete's ability to excel.
And let's not forget the mental side of things too, like motivation, discipline, mental toughness, the ability to handle pressure. Those are all essential, especially in a high-stakes sport like hockey.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And we can't overlook the importance of a strong support system either. The role of parents, family, and teammates in creating a positive and encouraging environment is invaluable.
It really is a combination of so many elements. The physical, the mental, the emotional, and the social. They all work together to shape an athlete's journey.
Precisely. This research, with its focus on nutrition, offers a fascinating glimpse into one, crucial piece of that puzzle.
It definitely does. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought. We've explored the specific dietary needs of these young hockey players, but I think the bigger takeaway is recognizing that individual needs matter, and tailoring our approach is key.
That's a powerful point. Whether we're talking about athletes, students, or just anyone striving to reach their full potential, understanding individual needs and providing the right kind of support can make all the difference.
Absolutely. So as you go about your day, consider this. How can you apply this principle of individualization in your own life? How can you better understand and address the unique needs of those around you? Whether it's your family, your colleagues, or your community, it's a question worth pondering.
It certainly is. And on that note, we'll bring this deep dive to a close. Thanks for joining us on this exploration. We look forward to diving into a new topic with you soon. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep those brains firing.
Thanks for tuning in to the Science of Hockey. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share it with your friends, teammates, or anyone who loves hockey as much as you do. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment to let us know what you liked, what you'd like to hear next, or any questions you have. Your feedback helps us make the show even better. Until next time, keep your skates sharp, your mind open, and keep chasing the science behind the game.